The island of Britain in 2026 is a very scary place. In the bowels of the Big Brother state apparatus, cogs churn for hours a day, turning treasonous power fantasies of panopticon surveillance and the criminalization of the wrong thoughts into a terrifying daily existence for its native populations, many of whom are unaware of the prison being built around them, and even worse, are conditioned to accept their imprisonment and extinction as good and necessary. It doesn't have to be this way. The weak and the evil that created the hard times for their own personal gains of power and wealth have, in these pursuits, brought out a fire in the hearts of men that hasn't been seen in generations. A fire that burns in the hearts of men like my guest today.
Liberate England!
Today on Voice of the Valleys, ReformUK seem to be showing themselves to be very rattled by the meteoric rise of Restore Britain, even resorting to calling them neo-Nazis on live TV and potentially getting them in legal hot water as they do so. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, the Welsh countryside has received a tremendous addition in the form of a path of excrement, and the Greens candidate for the Gorton and Denton by-election said something which we really need to have a little bit of a poking fun at. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys yet again with your host, friend in neighbourhood, far right thug, always satirical, unless it's not, Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. It's Wednesday, the 18th February today, Ash Wednesday. So wish you guys all the best on who may be partaking in Ash Wednesday and engaging in the season, the upcoming season of Lent. Obviously, wishing you guys nothing but the best and a very, I don't know if you can say happy time, because Lent is obviously, a time of penance and reflection on sins and all of those kinds of things. But it's a very, very happy Lent, and wishing nothing but the best for you all who are observing. So, getting straight into today, ladies and gentlemen, one other thing. It actually, on today, Wednesday, the 18th of February, so I'm hoping we can get this out before it goes into Thursday. It's actually Josh Fernie's birthday today. So if you happen to follow Josh on X or any of the other social media platforms, anything like that, he actually released a podcast episode, sort of the show that he's doing at the moment on YouTube called Nature's Nationalist, which I'd strongly recommend you go and at least give him the follow and listen to what he has to say. And if you wouldn't mind dropping him a nice little happy birthday message, either in his X DMs if they're open, or his comment section, whatever it might be, just because we're going to be nice like that. We're going to be nice like that. Josh has always been very, very nice to me. He's appeared on the show more than once, obviously. So if you could all go over and wish him a happy birthday, I would greatly appreciate it as well. Getting into main topics of the day, making sure, firstly, I know I've done 2 segues now and I've failed on both of them. Members area, early access, Callum Barker, make sure you go and get over there if you've used the previous promotions. Would love to get some engagement in those membership areas and love to get some feedback on that conversation as well. Hope you guys enjoy it. Getting straight into today for the third and final time. So, lots happened recently. Rupert Lowe recently announced, because of remarks made by Reform's candidate of choice for mayoress of London, that he's potentially, or Restore Britain, I should say, is potentially going to be taking legal action against Reform UK, because Layla Cunningham come out on GB News today. This is courtesy of GB Politics page on X. This clip is going to be coming from, they published it 20 to 4 this afternoon, saying that Restore Britain, Rupert Lowe's party, is a party for neo-Nazis and essentially wanting something resembling an Aryan state for the UK. And literally throwing out the term neo-Nazis, which, as we know, especially when it comes to people who look more and more like the establishment every single day, and the goons that they have on their behalf, like the Antifas and all of those, which we're going to be covering a little bit later, this is used as a smear to justify getting people killed, essentially, to actually do away with any sort of real opposition. We notice now, ever since that Reform have seemed to have fallen in line, that all of the allegations of like anti-Semitism and all of this stuff seem to have gone away, at least for, in the ferocity that it once came in, is now being solely directed at Restore, and that seems to tell me, at least, where the real source of opposition is coming from. So this is the clip in question, where Layla Cunningham labelled Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain, and seemingly obviously all of their supporters and followers as well, as the dreaded Nazi slur, which should not be accurate and indicative of many of Reform supporters, many of whom are just dejected, Restore's supporters, who are just dejected Reform supporters who have seen Reform massively fall off on what they promised to do, and like the pigs in Animal Farm, with the creatures looking on from outside, have looked more and more like the humans, like the establishment that they were supposed to be rebelling against, and even more so, as we touched on last time, Nigel Farage seemingly being so proud that he was even more ruthless than the other parties in how he dealt with Rupert Lowe, just because it seems that in Farage's own words, he wanted to actually engage in a mass deportation scheme as Reform were promising. But here you go. Here's Layla Cunningham's remarks, and it's quite interesting. Quite a few things to talk about with regards to this. But here's the clip coming on screen now.
They're talking about if you're not white and Christian in this country, you're not British. Right? They're going back to some kind of like neo-Nazi Aryan race. If you're not white, I mean, I've heard their spokesperson on Talk TV and on TV saying, if you are not white and Christian, then you're not deemed to be British. And, you know, that flies in the face of wanting integration and assimilation, because no matter how much you integrate or assimilate, according to them, you will never be British.
Well, look, I mean, they're not here to defend themselves right now, but the bottom line is there might be people in their party who say one thing who don't, but that might not be the party line.
They're talking...
So a little bit of defense from the other news anchor here. Already the optics on this kind of conversation are going to be very bitter in the mouths of many people watching this, because you're watching two foreigners discussing what it quote-unquote means to be British, and calling what many people now see as a genuine patriotic opposition to the establishment in the form of Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain as a neo-Nazi party, when that's obviously not true. So, at least as it presently stands. Anyway, obviously a lot can change in 3 years. To play devil's advocate, a lot can change in 3 years. But literally, this is just the establishment reacting as exactly the way the establishment would react and the way you would expect them to react. Calling everyone Nazis and fascists to just instantly turn everybody against them like it's some kind of Pavlovian conditioning, right? You hear that term, doesn't matter if they're innocent or guilty, doesn't matter if it's true or not, right? Instantly then that organization or that person, whoever it is, has to be destroyed, maybe even literally, as we've seen with the slurs and the labels that were put on Charlie Kirk unfairly, which then, in the minds of many, justified his assassination and caused celebrations and elation when his life was taken in the eyes and hearts of many. People say that Reform are resembling the establishment more and more every day. They've now even started using the establishment terms. Now we started using the establishment terms for seemingly delivering or expressing intent to deliver on what the British people want presently and have wanted for a long time. There's a little bit of context. I was going to bring this up a little bit later. Lucy White shared this, showing how far back, and I've highlighted this as well in the past, how far back these issues go. They predate Blair. They predate all of the people who usually become the targets for any discussion around immigration and all of this kind of stuff, the diversity push, right? Blair said he was waging war on the forces of conservatism, right? Literally saying he's going to upend British society in this way. But it was happening and going on, as we know, long before then. Even when the country had not experienced anything like the demographic changes that we have in the modern day, you still had rape gangs. You still had rape gangs and all these things back in the 50s, 60s, and they never stopped operating. It's not even a historical issue. It's still going on to this day, as we know. But Lucy's highlighted, as I've highlighted before as well, some of the polling data that has been done over the course of, the early decades, especially when this demographic change started to take place around the Windrush time and around the times of like the riots that were occurring in the late 50s and all of this stuff, shared this, which is quite stark. A national opinion poll from 1965 showed that 88% of the British public supported restricting immigration from the Commonwealth back in 1965, 60 years ago. Immigration was already strongly opposed to 3 decades before Blair came in 1997. It says immigration. Almost the whole country supports the government's policy of restricting immigration. Only 1 voter in 20 thinks that the government's motion was wrong. There is no significant difference between the parties in the answers to these questions, and that is Labour, Conservative, Liberal, all of them in agreement. I believe it was a Labour establishment at the time, if I'm not mistaken. The question is, do you think that the government was right or wrong to introduce new measures to restrict immigration? All of them, 88% thinking it was right, 5% thinking it was wrong, and 7% saying that they don't know when it comes to all of them. Conservatives, funnily enough, were actually lower on the whole than Labour and Liberals at the time, which just shows you this completely civilizational change in people's political outlook. I mean, it was the Liberals in the modern day, you know, for all of their touting of people being fascist and all of this stuff and not agreeing with them. It was them that gave people in the modern day the closest thing resembling to a fascist state, right? With the government mandated garment of the mask, the lockdowns, the forced jab, the vaccine passports, all of this stuff, right? So you can't go anywhere if you don't get the jab, or if you don't submit to this, you know, invasive digital ID and all of this kind of stuff. If you don't put your mask on when you go into the shops and everything, shutting down businesses, massively taking over things by the state. You know, the draconian police enforcement procedures, right, on families who just wanted to go to parks and all of this stuff, right? In the modern day, it just shows you when people say that it's the left that have branched off, right? It's the left that have branched off and gone absolutely friggin' Looney Tunes, right? With how they are in the modern day. Many people in this regard on the conservative or the right side of politics, I don't want to say conservative in terms of the Tories, obviously, but conservative on the right side of politics and wanting to conserve the way that British society was, haven't really changed. Haven't really changed. So, especially damaging, you see then supposedly your anti-establishment alternative is now using these terms that the establishment and the Antifa guys use. Really, really shows where their political allegiance lies, in my opinion. Just to give you a little bit more insight on this, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick breakdown. So this was a 1965 Gallup poll where 88% of Britain supported the Labour government's new restrictions on Commonwealth immigration, with cross-party approval ranging from 89% among Conservatives to 91% among Liberals, as we've seen. Highlights early public opposition to post-war immigration policies, predating Blair's 1997 tenure by over 3 decades. Very, very stark indeed. And the thing is, she went on about integration, she went on about assimilation. All of this now, as we've seen, has just been a complete lie, right? When the numbers get high enough, right? Maybe in some instances you could do it when the numbers are very, very small. But we've seen in the numbers that have been had in Britain, right? The levels of immigration where you're bringing in entire percentages of the population every single year, right? You get colonization, you get takeover, you get ethnic cleansing from these communities. There's no other way to describe it. And seemingly, when these people will either be pushed on it, or will see it as a way to try and score some weird kind of brownie points if they think the response is going to be positive, they will just openly say that they are not British, right? They'll seemingly say, to appeal to some voters, that the ethnic component of being British is important, which obviously it is. That is its most base component, right? If you come from the northwestern European tribes that make up the native peoples of these isles, right? That's obviously extremely important. That's like the bedrock. You can change your religion. You can change how you think. You cannot change your blood and your DNA. That's just the way that it is. Nobody can, right? So on one side, then they'll say that, you know, when they feel as though they can get some votes off it, or when they feel that they can appeal to a demographic, they'll say, look, this is happening, it's really bad. And then when it comes to the other side, they'll then openly tout how, seemingly at least, like, proud they are, or happy to at least acknowledge that they are not British. They are not ethnically British, which Layla Cunningham, in this short clip from Talk TV, just outright said so.
Yeah. And we know from polls that the majority of Reform supporters see Britishness as being very linked to ethnicity and where you were born. What would you say to that?
I mean, I'm not ethnically British. That is true.
Yeah.
So like I said, very, very short clip. And granted, I'm just getting this from social media. I don't know what was said after this. So to play devil's advocate, maybe there was something said after this which adds important context. If you guys happen to know anything about where this clip is from, right? It's from Good Morning Britain. So if you're watching this, on some outlets, it might end up getting taken down, right? Because when I've played clips from Good Morning Britain in the past, they haven't exactly reacted the most positively, right? But literally saying here, when it comes to saying that, you know, when there's no risk to saying it, right, they'll only say, well, no, I'm not British. I'm not ethnically British, right? But then at the other side of the mouth, they say they're just as British as you and me, which you can't square this circle. You know, you have round peg, square hole, or round hole, square peg, whichever you want to put it. Really, really not good. Really, really not good. It just resembles more and more and more the change that's going on with the smears, right, with the labels and all of this stuff, which shows Reform gaining, very, very sadly, I might add, more and more of these, you know, establishment qualities every single day, which is very, very sad indeed. Now, one of the other things that Nigel Farage said, if you remember, was that he doesn't think that Rupert Lowe will do very well. Even in Great Yarmouth, he said he won't be on 1%. I think we've got some interesting stuff to go over on why this prediction might not bear fruit also. But before we get that, here's the context on what Nigel Farage said from, additionally, that conference which we discussed on the podcast yesterday, right? Where now he's talking about Rupert Lowe's political ventures in Great Yarmouth, which is his constituency. And there's been an interesting video that's come out recently as well, which may cast doubt on the claims made in this video.
As far as Rupert Lowe is concerned, there will be some polling published later today that shows his recognition factor amongst members of the British public. It is not very high at all. And so a push poll that says 10% is utter rot. The party isn't even registered. He won't be on 1%. Anywhere, not even probably in Great Yarmouth. Thank you.
Secure the clapping from the trained seals and the acolytes of Farageism. Well, this is from Restore Britain, admittedly, so maybe it may be a little bit biased. People have called into question a lot of this polling data, especially when Nigel Farage seems to already indicate that he seems to understand exactly what these polls will illustrate. Maybe it's him having good prediction. Maybe it's him having expressed knowledge of where they're going to be extracting this data from. But Montgomery Toms actually went down to Great Yarmouth, it seems, or up to Great Yarmouth, really, I should say, to ask the people what they thought, and this is what they had to say.
What would your message be to people who have the opportunity to vote for Restore Britain?
I'd say go for it.
I think it's our only hope.
He's standing up for this country.
Get behind Rupert and support a good, honest man.
If we had a Rupert Lowe as every MP, we'd be in a lot better place.
He doesn't want to see it given away.
He'd definitely get my vote, and I think everybody else in Britain should get out there and vote if they want to keep this country great.
Open your eyes and see Reform for what it is.
It's time for us to stand up for ourselves at last.
If this doesn't work, I think the country's screwed.
We want to put the great not back only in Yarmouth, but really in Britain.
I've got a new party to look forward to. Someone gives me a bit of hope. And we'll take it from there. See how we go.
What would your message be?
Now, again, like doing this because echo chamber, all of this stuff. I've even spoken again with Fernie about this, dangers of echo chambers and all of this stuff. To play devil's advocate, maybe because this is Restore Britain branded and appears to be, kind of PR for them. Maybe if you want to try and, nitpick this or whatever, you could say that there's a good chance maybe these are cherry picked and maybe they've chosen the ones that are in support of Rupert and Restore Britain for these purposes. Right. And any who said anything negative about him or whatever, they've conveniently left out. OK, could be true. could be true. I don't think so, though. I don't think so. I don't think they would have included any negative ones for that reason, but I don't think there would be many negative ones for some of the reasons that we talked about before. I don't know of any other MP this present moment in time who donates his entire monthly MP salary to different ventures in his local community. Pardon me, or in his constituency. Like we talked about last time, he was donating his salary to help out with the renovations of, it was like a scouts venue, I think it was. Go back and check that last episode. The actual post is in there that Rupert mentioned where the money was going. And he said he was hoping going to go to new flooring, new walls, and as much as possible, right, for things in his community. And you can see here that when he goes down and actually interacts with people, they're not like shunning him away. They're not treating him like some stinking leper or anything like this. They're interacting with him, right? You can see them here. They're getting close with him. They're talking with him. You could maybe say, oh, it's just for the camera or whatever. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it speaks all the more to an establishment in reform that is well and truly rattled and is trying to look for anything to discredit their opposition, because their opposition actually has a lot more backing than they give them credit for. Sorry, guys, I had to pause that a bit quick, so you would have seen a slight jump cut there just because I accidentally moved the source out of the way for the clip, and I had to then, reformat and put it in position. So, as you can see here, I think my take, and I think it's resonating with a lot more people throughout the country as well. You're seeing all of the Restore Britain edits on X at the moment. Many people also saying, who are on other platforms like TikTok, for example, where I'm not on there, very, very rarely. Not even once in a blue moon, even rarer than that. And also on Instagram. Instagram is completely even more unhinged than X at the moment. It's true. It's unprecedented from what I've seen, especially when you take into account how it would have been a few years ago. But I think maybe something that might have to do with this, ladies and gentlemen, and the broad mass appeal is just that Rupert Lowe is obviously positioning himself and Restore Britain as a genuine alternative, genuine case of opposition, and are really leaning into it. And because they've shown, at least at this present moment in time, that they're not becoming the establishment like ReformUK and the rest of them, you get edits that people make in their spare time like this. Let me introduce you to Rupert Lowe's new venture, which is not actually Rupert Lowe's new venture. I'm saying that just for, any kind of legal purposes or whatever. Deportation Park, ladies and gentlemen. I'm playing it on mute because I don't want it to get copyrighted for the music. I got a feeling I'll probably get copyrighted for the scene anyway. But you can see here, for those of you who are not watching but listening, it's a scene from Jurassic Park. It's got Rupert Lowe's face superimposed onto the main guy, right? And you can see if we skip it on a little bit, it's it's the scene from Jurassic Park where the big dinosaurs come in. First time you really see them, and you have the music swelling and all of this stuff, right? But it's a bunch of planes taking off from from a mix of greenfield and airport traffic control terminal. So you can see here that there is broad public appeal for this kind of stuff, right? It's kind of a thing within a debate. The audience doesn't lie, right? For the most part anyway. The audience is usually a reflection of the reality in a debate. But you're seeing that now where all across all these different social media platforms, people are putting in their own time outside of their own already busy days where they're probably going to work, maybe even working 2 jobs, taking care of their family, all of this stuff, right? To put time into this, to making memes. You don't see that for ReformUK anymore. You did in the run-up to 2024. You did in the run-up to the 2024 election when people did believe that they were everything that Restore Britain is now marketing themselves as. You don't see it anymore, right? You see them getting laughed out of the place. You see them getting lambasted in their comment section, and often getting ratioed by other big accounts and by accounts like Rupert and Restore Britain, right? That's not for nothing, right? The online right, quote unquote, has been instrumental in really pushing a lot of the Overton window with regards to these concepts and these talking points. I think Rupert and Britain not only know that, but respect it, and actually respect those people, the genuine patriotic people of this nation. And that's why I just think that, especially with the skin in the game that Rupert has personally, right? They made it personal, right? With the legislation, with the false claims, with insinuating he has dementia, with Anderson, and going on the record talking about, you know, his dog and all of this stuff and what happened with that, right? Stabbing him in the back. Rupert now literally calls Anderson a rat, right? That's not nice terms. That's not like at least without some serious kind of talking and like apology and stuff like that, right? That's not like a easily reconcilable relationship. You know what I mean? We're talking about, like I've said, like I mentioned in the intro, right, to my conversation with Callum Barker, right, people who have had this fire lit under them, right, either because they've been directly persecuted by the state or they've been stabbed in the back, whatever. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. It's not about financial incentive. It's not just about making memes and all of this kind of stuff and being in it for your own personal gain and for the fame and acclaim. No, these people actually want to set out to make change. And that is what the establishment fears. And ultimately, it's going to come back on negatively on a lot of reform now as well. That's why they fear that change, because they have been seemingly outed in many ways now for the traitors that they seem to be. And there's been a lot of things resurfacing at the moment. Certainly things that I don't think Nigel Farage would want you to see. I don't think, ladies and gentlemen, he certainly, I don't think, wants you to see this clip of him dancing with one of the main arbiters of Britain's destruction over the course of the Conservative administration, Priti Patel. But that's exactly what this clip is showing. All the while, you know, Brits were being raped, murdered, all of this stuff. You know, the thing of the reason why the French Revolution happened, right? The reason why the French Revolution happened is because the monarchy were partying and all of this stuff while the French citizenry was starving to death, essentially. You know, let them eat cake and all of this stuff. Not a good look from your supposed based opposition. Certainly not also a good look with all of the other talking heads that have coming out to seemingly defend them and all of this stuff and seemingly present a cancel culture ready on the quote-unquote right. Biggest thing is people worry about Reform and Restore Britain splitting the right-wing vote. You know, I don't think you're going to split the right-wing vote because Reform are not a right-wing party, right? If anything, they're like centrist, maybe even centre-left, which is hilarious because Groch still describes Plaid Cymru as a centre-left Welsh nationalist party, which I find is hilarious, right? Groch, I think, is pretty good vast majority of the time, but absolutely not. You know, Plaid Cymru, as we know, they are leftist lunatics. But again, how do you see the difference between the people that have destroyed the country, the humans that came before, and the pigs that are now coming after, right? Your supposed glorious, equalizing counter-revolutionaries. They look exactly the same. I'm looking at this, I almost can't tell them apart. You know what I mean? I'm like the creatures looking into the farmhouse when the pigs and the men inside are playing cards and having beer and arguing and squabbling amongst themselves. In this instance, they're laughing and having a dance as well, which they actually did in the book as well. Not so much dancing, but having a toast and laughing together, all while the animals outside suffer in decrepitude and slavery, essentially. Can't tell the difference. And then Reform go and literally fill their cabinet full of Labour, Tory defectors and foreigners. How are we supposed to tell the difference between them and the establishment? Quite literally. And given Farage's track record, as I mentioned before, I don't think he's doing it just to get in and then all of a sudden he's going to flip the switch and become an ultra-based nationalist leader. Or anything like that. Don't think it's going to happen. This as well, this is quite interesting. A video has been circling now of Nigel Farage allegedly personally approached the Conservative Party asking for a safe seat to be an MP forever. And apparently he got turned down. And that was then, apparently, according to this person who posted it on here, what led to taking over Reform UK and now spending, every day criticising the same Tories and establishment, seemingly, that rejected him. I'll just let this video play now.
But some 2 decades ago, he walked up this drive in Surrey to talk at the home of a Conservative county councillor to a then Tory MP about getting himself a safe Tory seat.
So that's autumn 2004.
Yeah.
He sits here.
He does. He sits there.
You're there.
Yep.
And you're there.
And I'm here, yeah.
And how does the conversation go?
So I said to him, look, what do you want? And there's a deep intake of breath. And he said, I want to be nominated for a solid Conservative seat in Kent. Can you fix it?
I mean, I recall that there was a specific seat up for selection at Tunbridge Wells.
So Nigel Farage's memory of all of this is that a Tory knight of the Shires, I think he means you.
I think he does too.
Approached him.
Yes.
On behalf of Michael Howard, the then Tory leader.
Yes.
Because you wanted Nigel Farage as an asset.
Yes.
Neutralising UKIP on the right of the Tory party.
Yes. And all of that is a figment of his imagination.
He says you approached him.
That is a lie.
We put those claims to Nigel Farage.
Well, hang on, they offered me a safe
That's
seat.
not their memory.
Well, they offered me a safe seat, which I didn't take.
They suggested you came sniffing back then.
They are dishonest. If they're saying that, that sums them up. Dishonest to their back teeth. I was approached by a knight of the Shires to meet confidentially and offered Tunbridge Wells. And they said, you have it on a plate. You'll be the MP there for as long as you want.
And you said?
And I said no. They are
He did not like
Completely
that.
and utterly untrue. Complete opposite of what happened.
The thing is here, right? You've got ex-Conservative MP, and Lee sitting next to him is Helen Clack. She was Conservative Surrey County Council. Who do you know who to believe? Because the Conservatives' reputation's in the frigging gutter, rightfully so. And now Reform's reputation and Nigel Farage's credibility is in the gutter. So how do you know? You could play devil's advocate on both sides. You could play devil's advocate on both sides of the situation. And ultimately, the people who end up suffering the most for having this difficult way to get to what the actual truth is are the constituents of just the general public who rely on these people to represent them and do right by them. But we're seeing the one thing that really does seem to be true is that a lot of them are just in it for themselves, which is obviously not new. But that shouldn't be something which you just say, oh, well, that's it. That's just what they're going to do. No, you demand better. You either vote differently, right? And you actually get out and talk about these things. You actually take a risk and talk about these things. Maybe have a few disagreements with people and all of this kind of stuff, right? Bring these things forward. If they have events, you can go to them, ask them a question, really ask them these hard-hitting questions. That's what they're there for at the end of the day. That's what they sign up for. So, how do we know who to trust? How do we know who to trust? You trust what these guys are saying? The Conservative MP and councillor? Oh, I don't know these people from Adam, right? I don't know who these people are, right? When he was Conservative MP, right, which was, he was Conservative MP 1992 to 2024, right? Until that period, from 1992, I wasn't even in existence, right? I wasn't even in existence. And I didn't really have any kind of head for politics. It massively changed during my recovery in hospital. That's when my outlook massively changed. Had nothing to do but basically watch Matt Walsh. I ended up discovering Matt Walsh because I heard that he was like this fascist or whatever, and ended up watching a lot of his content while I was just bedridden. Well, I wasn't bedridden, but had nothing better to do, essentially. And I was just like, oh, this guy's actually just talking a lot of sense. He's actually just talking a lot of common sense. That was around, midway through the year 2023. Before that, I was just politically apathetic, so to speak. Didn't really have a clue what was going on. For my formative years of being a child and growing up and whatnot, obviously likely in a much different area, I would have been a child when all this was going on. But who do we trust? How do we know who to trust? That's the question. Another reason why I think, ladies and gentlemen, that Reform, in this instance, throwing out these smears and labels and whatever else because they're so rattled, right? And the establishment as well. Alex, I can't even remember her surname. She goes by that Alex woman on X. She had a conversation with Bob recently in which she basically like kind of veiledly threatened him with like saying like, look, you're young, don't know why you're doing this. And he insinuated that, well, it seems that there's essentially a right-wing cancel culture waiting for me if I don't toe the establishment line. And she basically said, well, yeah, maybe there is, right? You know, exactly the same thing that we were told about, you know, exactly the same way the establishment would operate. They've announced 2 new councillors in a Northamptonshire council have joined Restore Britain. Is Jack Goncalves and Darren Rance. So Goncalves is the councillor for Rushden Lakes North, Northamptonshire Council, previously Reform UK, and councillor for Brickhill and Queensway, previously Reform UK, is Mr. Darren Rance. Now, this is something that I actually have concerns about with Reform UK. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't see why I shouldn't. Because obviously, Restore Britain. Because we saw with Reform UK, you get these two confused just because they both start with re, right? They both start with re and they're inextricably intertwined with one another because of the betrayal of Rupert Lowe, right? There's a blood feud between these two. But Restore Britain now have taken these guys on, right? Which in theory would be good. And I trust their vetting process. I trust them at the present moment in time. They haven't given me any reason not to. I don't think they've given many people any reason not to. Pardon me. The thing that I was concerned about, though, is obviously in the pursuit of more influence and potentially diluting the message and the focus of Restore Britain in order for broader public appeal the same way Reform had done. I was like, just please don't let this go the same way that Reform did, whereby they just taking in any Tom, Mustafa and Ahmed just to make up their numbers, right? Doesn't seem to be that that's the case. Rupert Lowe actually announced recently on his X page that there was so many applications for Reform councillors coming in, and they were actually rejecting a lot of them. They weren't just taking in any person of any stripe, any background, right? Certainly a lot of these people are just seeing that the ship is sinking on the side, and they decided to join it, and they're trying to escape like rats fleeing the ship, right? Actually announced that he'd actually rejected a lot of these applications, which actually gave me a decent sigh of relief, you know, being like, oh shit, maybe this is different. Maybe this isn't just going to be flooded with people that are looking to save their own skins, right? Again, this rise has been meteoric. Somebody put in my live chat for the live premiere of last night's episode that Restore Britain have been the fastest rising political movement in British history. Don't know if that's actually true, but if it is, that's very, very exciting times. It's very, very exciting times. And again, another element to throw at Conform, right? I'm going to increasingly call Conform because it's easier and get them less mixed up than Reform and Restore. Showing that they've actually lost a lot more of their appeal than they actually realize. And now, again, that's indicative. Now they're going to start moving to new voter bases to try and save their skin. If anything, now it's them splitting the vote. Because you guys are going in that direction, you're literally just voting for more of the same. Potentially even worse. One of the big lessons from Animal Farm, which somebody pointed out in the comment section on the videos, like, weren't they all technically socialist? The point of the animals in that story was that they could not see it coming, right? To describe them as socialists, describe the animals as socialists. The pigs, absolutely. The pigs were cunning, conniving. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. Certainly Napoleon, right? That's the whole point. He foresaw this reign of terror. He foresaw what he was going to do. The animals didn't. Boxer, for God's sake, who's meant to be the representative of the working class, right? Who's consistently exploited and betrayed. Right? If you read the story, you know what happens to Boxer, and that's a perfect analogy for your generations of parents and grandparents that have slaved and toiled all their life, paying taxes, paying into the system, working ever harder to support a family. All of this stuff as the government extracts more and more and more from them. And then when they try to go into retirement, when they try to go out into the pasture, so to speak, maybe live off their pension, the government says, no, here's some euthanasia, and they send Boxer off to the knacker. Right? Boxer couldn't even do the friggin' alphabet. Right? That's meant to be, at least in my opinion, an allegory, I don't know if that's the right word, but indicative of the working class, the regular working class, not being able to see the scheme for what it was until it's too late. So to call those animals socialists because they fell into the system and went along with it and they fell for the pigs' lies, I think is very disingenuous, right? I kind of lost my track on where I was going with this story now. Let me just pause it while I try and get my train of thought back. Right, I think what I was saying, right, I've just had a quick pause. I think what I was saying was, again, the animals in Animal Farm, they could necessarily see it coming, right, which is how you guys are, in my opinion, at this present moment in time, and I want to be wrong. I want to stress this right now. I want to be wrong. I want reform to be every bit as based as the left tells them to be. Right? If they were, Restore Britain would be completely unnecessary, would not exist. Right? But I see them looking completely indistinguishable from the establishment, quite literally now using the same words to describe the constituents that they dejected. Right? So if you're voting for them, you're quite literally just voting for more of the same, potentially even more brutal. That was the biggest thing. The pigs regime is even more brutal than Mr. Jones's regime when he owned the farm. Right? You think of the people in Russia during the Soviet times, basically in their minds almost begging for the Tsar to come back, wishing for the Tsar to come back, because the Soviet regime was so much worse. That's, in my opinion, where we are headed currently, based on what we see. Right? I could be wrong, but that's at least where the evidence points me right now with ReformUK. And that's why I say ReformUK is not splitting the right-wing vote at all. ReformUK is not splitting the right-wing vote at all. People of right-wing sentiment, they forgone them long ago. They are seriously rattled, however, and that's why it doesn't matter now whether you're wearing a red neckerchief, or a blue neckerchief, or even a turquoise one, you're going to get called a Nazi all the same. Fall in line or get called the labels. It's literally the exact same line. It's unfortunate, but that to me seems as the way it is, at least for now. Next on the chopping block for today, there's been some big things revolving around free speech at the moment and the real threat to Western civilization, right? Remember not too long ago, I believe it was just before the turn of the end of the year, you had a terror attack, Muslim terror attack against Jews in Bondi, and you had white people being the scapegoats for it, the main scapegoats for it, white Nazis, supposedly, being the scapegoats for it. Prime Minister Albanese has doubled down again, even after all of the boos and everything that he got in some of his events that he went to towards the end of the year in the aftermath of that terror event. Brandon Hochul, by the way, got sentenced, I believe, recently to, I think it was a year or more in prison. Pretty much the same sentence, by the way. The Notice had done an article on it. The same sentence was given to a sports coach paedophile, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a very, very similar sentence. That shows you how the establishment see these two. They see, right, in more often than not, it seems at the moment, they're even friendly, right, to the people who do heinous things to children and actually want to protect them. They view speech crime, quote-unquote speech crime, as more of a threat than, you know, people who do heinous things to kids. That should tell you a lot about the political bent of these quote-unquote leaders, should we say. Prime Minister Albanese has gone on, in this instance, some Australian TV program, said that white supremacy and sovereign citizen movements are the most concerning ideological threats to Australia's safety, according to Australians Against the Agenda. Here's that clip for you now.
The threats that are out there to security from a rise in a range of areas are very real, whether it be anti-Semitism, whether it be a white supremacist ideology, which this person was radicalised down, or whether it be sovereign citizens. I've been to funerals of police officers in Queensland and Victoria who were killed by people who don't recognise the state. We need to isolate these ideological extremes, and we need to reassert our values as Australians. And this was a horrific attack on First Nations people that could have had catastrophic consequences had it been.
So, seen that I think it was out of Australia as well, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Noticer is an Australian news organisation, that there was even more members of that left-wing satanic paedophile cabal that we covered a good few weeks ago as well on the show, maybe even a few months ago, whenever it was, that had been arrested again. You had obviously the Bondi terror attack, which was Muslims. I've yet to see, at the very least, an attack by quote-unquote far right-wing groups, at least in Australia. Anyway, there was a plot, I think, somewhere, alleged plot anyway, somewhere in Europe that was foiled a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, which really does show that this is radicalizing people, which is a concern, right? Difference is that the government is not going to stop with this. That is going to be something which they can use for their agenda, obviously, but that's not going to make them stop their agenda, right? Nothing is going to make them stop, right? Aside from just the force of the people. I don't really know how to describe it, essentially. True political change, right? Enough people in the political system or whatever is to enact true change before the system is completely overrun and there is no way to salvage it anymore, right? It's at that point people are just going to do what they have to do to survive and get out of the grips of this authoritarian regime, right? Or totalitarian regime, I should say. But again, anti-Semitism being mentioned, kind of surprised he didn't mention Islamophobia. That tends to be the other go-to term, right? Conveniently, then nothing happens when a bunch of left-wingers attack, just regular people in Australia celebrating Australia Day. You don't get the same response, right? More often than not, you get justifications and you get the police letting them go with maybe just a warning, if that. This goes hand in hand, however, with what I really wanted to talk about. And that is, according to open source intel, this one is on X, French President Macron, who in the wake of a 23-year-old man being lynched by an Antifa mob for defending a women's rights group, right? And seemingly, whilst he has hostile bands of foreigners walking around communities in France with assault rifles, right? Said that free speech is pure bullshit if nobody knows how you are guided through this so-called free speech, especially when it is to be guided from one hated speech to another hated speech, basically saying that free speech is bullshit unless the government is able to have control over it. And then obviously that means that it's distinctly not free.
Because free speech is a pure bullshit if nobody knows how you are guided through this so-called free speech, especially when it's to be guided from one hated speech to another hated speech. I just want to have a transparent road through these different speeches, and I want, by the way, to have a sort of public order. I want to avoid racist speech, hated speech, and so on. This is my... And the third one...
Tells you what you need to know. Tells you what you need to know. Supposedly, the same people like Macron and Keir Starmer and all those guys, they'll tout supposedly their pride and how proud they are of long-standing traditions of free speech. And then at the other side of their mouth, they'll say it's bullshit unless the government can control it for their own political ends. Right? Free speech is okay. It's not bullshit, provided you say what we want you to say. And if you don't say what we want you to say, it's not only bullshit, but you're going to go to prison for it. That's where we are. And these people still want to pretend, there's people in these nations still want to pretend that we are a free nation. Right? And the reason why it's so important, you think, oh, you shouldn't be allowed to say this stuff. The ability to speak freely is the knowledge also that you can think freely and you can think for yourself. Because in order to be able to think freely, think about it, even when you're thinking of ideas in your mind, you're expressing them in your inner monologue with words, right? Which is a form of speech, essentially. You have to risk being offensive. Talk about the realities of what's going on in Britain at the moment, right? Talk about the uncomfortable realities around why a certain advert on TfL was banned recently. You need to be able to risk being offensive because the stats are what they are. Unfortunately. He says this, mind you, as, according to Remix News, as I mentioned, masked men with assault rifles roam freely round the French city of Nice as people run for their lives. I'm not going to play this with volume, but according to the person who posted this, gunshots have been heard. Gunshots have been heard, apparently. And this is the video of the guys running around the streets with guns. Rifles. Bear in mind, French people can't have these weapons for their own self-defense, anything like that. But you have here what could amount, especially with the person holding the camera, if they are armed as well, essentially what is, I don't know what you call, a unit, you know, a cell. Enough people to seemingly do some serious harm if they wanted to. And like I said, according to the poster, person who posted this Remix News, allegedly gunshots have been heard. Terrifying. Terrifying for the locals of Nice, I would imagine. But obviously the main problem would be people talking about it. If it did turn out that these people were from an area of the world where we might say the usual suspects are from, then obviously the problem would not be them running around with guns seemingly like an amateur military unit. It would be the people talking about it. Similarly, it would be the people that are currently talking about and holding vigils for, as I mentioned, a young man who's no longer with us by the name of Quentin. His surname has since been released, but I've forgotten what it is. I don't know how to pronounce it. He was protecting the French, a French identitarian women's group called Collectif Nemesis. Right, we'll explain why they were there at the moment and why they were being attacked by these people. It was demonstrating outside a talk by Open Borders Palestinian activist Rima Hassan, who is just a flagrant liar, as we'll get into in a moment. But anti-fascists, as members of the Jeune Garde, descended on Quentin, wrestled him to the ground, and I think there was a group, it was in the tens, right? It was in the tens of people, I know that, beat him to death, quite literally lynched him for protecting a women's rights group. In fact, I will play this clip with the volume on because you can hear them shouting. Sorry, I was going to say shouting, but then I changed the chanting at the last minute, but didn't quite commit to it, so I ended up with shouting. You can hear them shouting, "Fascists, fascists, it's you, the terrorists." So here's that clip coming on screen for you. So that right there is one of the last moments of a young man, 23 years old, who was protecting a women's rights group from this mob of violent people, which, as you know, or as we know rather, they will call people fascists, Nazis, all of these things to justify their murder. They don't need to know anything about you. They don't care if you have kids. They don't care what you do for work. They don't care about anything other than you standing in the way of what they deem their political objectives to be, what they deem is good by what the state in this instance has told them, and the school system has told them. If you don't line up exactly with what they think, this could be you. So understand the target is on your back, whether you want it and realize it or not. For some of you, that's going to embolden you. For some of you, that's going to make you shrink away and not want a target on your back. Try and avoid all kind of scrutiny and essentially stay silent, which is ultimately what the state wants, right? But I can understand why. I can understand why. It's very, very scary. It's real world out there. This young man, 23 years old, murdered by these disgusting degenerates, who, as you can imagine, justified it, saying that they wish more had happened to him. Same way with Charlie Kirk, same way with Irina Zarutska. And that's why there's no giving grace to these people anymore. If you see people at a protest, right, like we saw in Warwick, and they're running over to a figure like a Steve Laws or Callum Barker or Josh Fernie or any of these other people, right, you don't give them the benefit of the doubt anymore, right? They're at bare minimum to hurt you. They're there at worst to kill you, right? The lowest they're going to go, right, in terms of lowest threshold is agitation for propaganda purposes. But even then, we've seen how quickly that can change as well. So, who were this group? Well, why were they being targeted, you might ask? Nemesis Collective. Let me read you the story that's on their webpage, which should tell you a lot about them as a group and why they would be targeted by such individuals. Why they would be ideologically opposed to Rima Hassan, why they would oppose what she was selling, and ultimately, then as we'll get into in a moment, why Rima Hassan is just a disgusting liar. Who is this enemy of women that no one talks about? You leave your house in the morning, dodging the gaze of the vindictive thugs loitering near the station. Then you board the subway. In the carriage, a vagrant shouts obscenities in a foreign language. Sometimes he accosts passers-by, staring intently at a young woman who has to leave the train, terrified. I'm just going to bring this up on screen for you a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to slightly recrop it, just so it's a little bit easier to see. This is on their website as well. You can go and read it. It's translated from French to English, so you'll be able to see it as well. You put on your headphones to block out the unbearable atmosphere that everyone in France is now familiar with, and you open your phone. Suddenly, a brute video starts playing, and what is manspreading? On your Instagram feed, an intersectional feminist begins to describe the typical profile of a woman abuser. Nicholas, 28, white. In short, it's you. Arte, Mediapart, public broadcasting, and the media in general bombard you with guilt-inducing images. The only enemy of the woman is the white man, or the only enemy of women is the white man. Everyone knows that, right? But how many times has Brut given a voice to one of the women sexually assaulted on public transport by a foreigner? 0. Yet 63% of sexual assaults on public transport in the Ile-de-France region in 2019 were committed by these men. None of these testimonies will ever appear in left-wing media, on Mademoiselle or Nastut. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I don't really care if I'm not. It's French after all. But these experiences, these traumas are very real. Do these victims have the right to speak? Who gives voice to these women? Is the liberation of speech truly achieved when neo-feminists try to silence women who recount experiences within a multicultural society? So they are ostensibly a right-wing identitarian women's group, and that's obviously why they are fair target for these groups. And they will destroy them the same way, right? They're all about believe all women, right? The left are all believe all women, be kind, be empathetic, all of this stuff, until it's a group that doesn't align with their political philosophy, that doesn't scapegoat the white man for things that he's not responsible for, right? And all of the societal ills, I might add, doesn't treat them the way that you would treat for some of you out there that might be a little bit more anime inclined, the way that the Eldians in Mali, I believe, in Attack on Titan are viewed, right? The kind of perpetual guilt, right? Civilizational guilt, all of this kind of stuff, right? This civilizational, generational guilt that has been put on white men in particular, right? Unless you're willing to blame them for literally everything, unless a rape or whatever it is, like a asylum seeker rapes a woman, or a horrendous incident with a child, whatever it is, right? As we see time and time again in Britain, unless you're willing to say that that's the fault of British society and the white man, you might as well be dead to these people. But it's the truth. Ultimately, it's the individual that's responsible for that. It's nothing to do with the society. One of the biggest things that made it so easy for these systems to take place when we started holding society guilty for things that the individual is guilty for. Right? However, Rima Hassan herself, which is deeply disgusting, this incident, she claimed that she really has no association with these groups like June Guard and everything like that. For each of my trips, the only and unique security service for which I collaborate and which accompanies me is that of La France Insoumise, I don't know if I'm saying that right, which never resorts to violence and which is in no way involved in these clashes. She put this up in a post in which she feigned horror at the facts concerning the young man Quentin, who at the time was believed to be, who at the time was between life and death, following a clash that occurred yesterday in Lyon between anti-fascist militants and identitarian militants. I don't actually know if they actually were militants. As far as I'm aware, it's just the one guy, Quentin, who was protecting this group who seemingly would not be militant. I think this is a kind of way to try and put this kind of equivalency fallacy into place, but I don't know. They could have been right-wing militants there as well. Who knows? Who were present alongside the far-right group Nemesis, which come to disrupt the conference which I have been invited to speak by Science Post students. Again, she claims she only has collaboration and association with this group here. Here's why that's not true. Here's why that's not true, which as my recent podcast guest Callum Barker pointed out very easily and eloquently, that she posed for a picture and supported the Antifa terrorist that murdered Quentin in this post from Raphael Arnaud, with the Jeune Garde Lyon, the exact faction where this took place. And, oh, who's tagged in here? Jeune Garde Lyon and Rima Mo Barak. And she's literally right here in the middle, shoulder to shoulder. Sorry, no, I pushed that in a little bit too far. Shoulder to shoulder with these people, as you can see in this image here. So tell us then, you want justice? You supposedly want justice, Hassan? Who are they? Hand them over. Tell the police their names. I'm assuming that's what you would have already done. If you are genuinely learned with horror the facts concerning the young man Quentin, and you've now been observably lying with regards to your association, or at least fan association with Jeune Garde, how about you, if you haven't already, go down to the police and tell them everything that you know, or come out and tell the public everything that you know, right? You won't do that, though, will you? You're secretly happy. You're trying to put across this veneer that you're actually horrified what happened to Quentin. No, you're actually happy that a perceived enemy of yours is out of the picture. Don't lie. We're not that stupid. We see right through it, because we have so many other examples as well. Even of so-called journalists who were using the internet to justify the murder of the young man Quentin. This is from Frontiers, or Frontier, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, obviously it's a French news outlet. They actually have a quote from Marcus Aurelius at the top of the page, which I think is really interesting. It says, "Reject opinion, you will be saved." It says on here, left-wing internet users are using social media to justify the lynching of Quentin in Lyon by anti-fascists. I'm just going to zoom in slightly to see if it comes up a little bit clearer for you. Following the terrible attack on Quentin, 23, in Lyon, several statements by journalists and activists close to the radical left are sparking a heated controversy on social media. One of them is this journalist, quote-unquote, by the name of Camille Steinaud, a contributor to Blast and Arrêt sur Image, I believe that's how you say it. You institutional left-wing parties are quite happy when there are anti-fascists around your events to protect you from the fascists, but the day that the fight gets a little too violent and a Nazi dies, you throw the anti-fascists under the bus. Screw you. She also posted, no one is forcing you to mourn the deaths of people who, if they had the chance, would send you to the firing squad. Completely neglecting the fact that that's what they already did to this young man Quentin. There's no evidence, at least from what I've seen, that he's actually a goose-stepping Nazi fascist or anything like that, right? Just a 23-year-old man who was in many ways doing what many people will call a duty and defending women from a disgusting, degenerate, violent mob. But obviously they don't care, right? You're getting in the way of their political initiatives. That means that you deserve... There's no punishment that could outweigh the guilt of the sentence that has already been imposed on you by your lack of political correctness in the eyes of these people. Charles H., presenting himself as a New Popular Front collaborator. That's a left-wing coalition in France, for those of you who might be wondering. The Delegation for Children's Rights at the National Assembly tweeted, "Bravo the Antifas of Lyon, cheering on the murder of an innocent man." Under Reem Hassan's Instagram post reacting to the announcement of Quentin's brain death, several comments also sparked outrage. "You ask for it, you find it. Make racists afraid again. I don't see what identity activists are doing there." Journalist Ricardo Pereira mentioned a brawl provoked by far-right feminist nationalist activists from Nemesis. I don't know if there's any evidence of them being violent or provoking, right? Obviously, I suppose you could say, it's again, play devil's advocate. Again, you can do this without giving the left the benefit of the doubt and giving them any undue credit or anything like that for the violent murderers that they are. You can maybe say they were there to potentially provoke a protest. Right, but if they weren't engaging in any kind of outright violent behavior or disruptive, coercive behavior or anything like that, right? We've seen that the left get away with this time and time again. The left get away with outright agitation, right, when it comes to their activism at political protest right-wing events, as we saw in Warwick. There's a clip coming up of that in my conversation with Callum Barker, by the way, to highlight the point that I was making. So stay tuned for that. You'll see an exact example of this. Right, how they get away with it, and the police will target the right winger for simply responding and protecting his personal space. Right, which again, you have to assume at this point now that these people are here with eyes on your life and murder in their hearts. Right, that's what you have to assume, because you have too many instances of this now, and they will justify it. There's nothing that you could do that they wouldn't justify this kind of stuff. Right. And then when it becomes a little bit too uncomfortable, when it becomes completely unsalvageable to justify and celebrate, they'll move on and they'll try and cover things up, which is what generations of political establishments have been doing with regards to rape gangs, obviously, at the political level. But one thing you might not be aware of, ladies and gentlemen, this is coming from Remix News again, is that journalists who've actually wanted to research the topic of rape gangs by migrants in places like Bavaria, for example, this is a journalist from Germany as an example now, you'll get labelled as racist and right-wing by the colleagues as another way seemingly to censor it as well. So Julia Roos, a high-profile television presenter, said it is still a taboo to research topics regarding why certain population groups are more susceptible to committing sexual offences. That's when I realised the whole editorial imbalance that when you dedicate yourself to such a topic. She added it became an environment where she was told, you're not allowed to say that and you're totally racist. Roos is currently at the centre of a significant cancel culture and media sovereignty debate in Germany. She is often described as a rare conservative voice within the German public broadcasting landscape, which is one of the worst offenders of promoting this political correctness mind virus, which is frequently criticised for having a left-green bias. 2025, Roos was chosen to host a new experimental debate format called CLAR, co-produced then by the Northern Public Broadcaster NDR and the Southern BR. The show's mission was to reach viewers who felt alienated by mainstream media by tackling sensitive topics like migration, COVID-19, and the farmers' protests. After the first episode of migration, a massive internal wave of criticism hit. Approximately 250 NDR employees signed an open letter distancing themselves from the show, accusing Roos of one-sided and populist reporting. Imagine distancing yourself when we have so much evidence of these things operating in a place like Britain, distancing yourselves from people trying to investigate systematic and what will often be racially and religiously motivated child rape, trafficking, drugging, torture, right? Where Britain has really been ground zero for this infection, as far as I'm aware, at the very least. And now, in the year of our Lord, 2026, you want to distance yourself from that? It's not going to end well for you in the next few years, I can promise you that. It's not going to end well for you, especially at this point in time. Right? Especially at this point in time when the scale of what has been going on in a place like Britain is undeniable. Anybody with a functioning moral compass at this point and a little bit of courage about them would be one of those people chomping at the bit to try and get to the truth of this issue. And the fact that people are trying to then already try and obfuscate tells me that these people and these institutions have something to hide that they already know about. They just don't want people finding it. And therefore, that will likely make them complicit. But here's an extract of the video that Remix News shared with Julia Roos here.
Themen, wo man glaubt, dass es bei denen nicht auf Wohlgefallen stößt. Mir selber ist es passiert, beim Thema Migration oder ein konkreteres Beispiel vor 2 Jahren war das, glaube ich, da war diese Debatte in NRW hochgekocht von wegen Sexualdelikte, genauer gesagt Gruppenvergewaltigungen von Migranten. Und dann wollte ich die Zahlen recherchieren in Bayern und da habe ich die ganze redaktionelle Unwucht mitbekommen, was passiert, wenn man sich so einem Thema widmen will. Das fand ich sogar noch schlimmer als irgendwie diese Tagesthemenkommentare, die ich davor gemacht habe, weil das war dann eher so die großen Themen. Aber das ist, glaube ich, immer noch, also ich würde sagen, das ist immer noch ein Tabuthema, wenn man versucht herauszufinden, was hinter dem Vorwurf steckt, dass bestimmte Bevölkerungsgruppen anfälliger für Sexualdelikte sind. Nicht, weil sie eine bestimmte Nationalität haben, Herkunft, sondern weil sie eine andere Sozialisierung haben, weil sie psychisch auffälliger sind und auch aus den Kriegsgebieten zum Beispiel kommen, weil sie ein anderes Frauenbild haben. Es gibt genug Erklärungen, warum das wahrscheinlicher wird, aber deswegen finde ich, darf man nicht wegschauen. Aber das, was natürlich sofort...
So you got a little bit of information about what was there, especially that last bit, right? But what comes immediately, the bit where I cut it off there, I didn't know exactly where to cut it off. But what comes immediately is that the cudgel with that's right wing, you're not allowed to say it, and that's totally racist if you say that. Even saying here that there's potentially, not just because they have a certain nationality or origin, right, that they could come from wars, they might just have a completely different socialization. Religion is another thing you're not allowed to touch in context of this, right? I would make a wager at this point that even if she found nothing, if Julia was allowed to investigate this in areas like Bavaria and whatever else, she found absolutely nothing, right? Just because she wanted to do her due diligence, maybe, again, as many people with functioning logical and reasoning faculties, is what I was trying to say, that she looks over a place like Britain and sees the rape gang inquiry stuff that's coming out at the moment from Rupert Lowe, and his rape gang inquiry, and is absolutely horrified by it, and rightfully so, and then thinks, logically, oh, hang on, we've had masses of immigration for people of the same countries, right? They've been the odd anecdote here and there, right? We've seen the statistics that they've been massively creeping up, and that there's all of these different attacks happening all over Europe, right? Maybe they're related. Maybe what's going on in Britain and being exposed in Britain could be happening here as well. Maybe she investigates it and finds absolutely nothing, right? And maybe we'll say it isn't true. Let's really go far in this hypothetical. Let's say then it wasn't true. History at this point, especially, would still look very fondly, right, on a person like Julia Roux for seeing that and wanting to investigate it and investigating it to the best of her potential, right? Especially if it turns out that people were hiding it, she did find something, she did expose it, and then she's able to not only highlight the scale of the problem that's going on, but also then the people who were complicit in it and the people that then chose to side with the predators and the sexual offenders in the name of multiculturalism, diversity, over their own people and the victims of these heinous offences. There would be a case there where history would shine very positively on one for the courage of one, because you're going up against media apparatus, cancel army, potentially people that want to take your life and do heinous things to you. All right, she's a young, attractive lady, right? A lot of these people, if they find out that she's investigating it, will maybe try and make her a target. She might be next as a target for these people. She's taking a massive risk by wanting to do that. Very courageous. Very courageous. And the fact of the matter is that she's getting this pushback already just for having this one episode of discussion around migration and all this stuff. Tells me that the powers that be in these different networks and whatever know where this is heading, and they're just going to try and do everything they can to stop it because they don't want the truth to come out. That's how I see it anyway. I could be wrong, obviously. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong. I think what's happened in Britain has been a very good precedent to see what would also have inevitably been happening all across Europe, because we've all been on the same suicidal track together, right? But the same, you know, massively left-wing globalist governments hell-bent on our destruction. So I dare say that if it's happening in Britain, it's happening in many other places as well. Says a lot about the people that don't want it investigated. At least in my opinion. Anyway. So, last couple of things now. Some things we can talk about a little bit later. So, this was quite interesting. A council in Wales, which, you know, many councils in Wales have been historically dominated by Labour for the most part, has actually massively changed, it seems, right? This is indicative, in my opinion, where I think it's important to talk about. It's indicative of a wider political shift you see happening across Wales, which really, at least in my time, certainly hasn't been seen. Right, so I believe I was born literally like just after devolution went into effect. Right, so I've only known devolution and the destruction of this once beautiful country. That's all I know. But Labour in Llanelli have actually lost control of a Welsh council, like we actually saw in the Caerphilly by-election, where they ended up losing it where Reform actually ended up losing it very narrowly to the Plaid Cymru candidate, right? The Plaid Cymru candidate ended up getting elected to 100% of the control of that seat, with less than half of the people actually wanting him, which is obviously always depressing, but that's just the reality of how it is at the moment. However, the turning out for Reform that happened then was very stark, that people are protesting it, they want change, and the people of Wales are not stupid, they're waking up. They're waking up. Now, many people in my constituency especially will just be Labour till they die. Labour till they die, this kind of die-hard tribalism, which in my opinion has just been massively undoing anyway, because if you give somebody that license where you're going to, you know, especially a political entity like a political party, where they can do anything to you and you will still continue to vote for them, that's basically giving them license to do anything and take advantage of you in perpetuity and with impunity, right? So you can't do that. You can't do that. Ultimately, the thing that's going to keep political initiatives, parties, and individuals in check is going to be know that if they don't follow through, or if they actively betray, right, the campaign promises or what they said to the people, that there's going to be pushback. They're going to suffer consequence because of it. Either going to lose their position or whatever. right? If they know that they're not going to lose a position, there's no accountability. There's no failure state in the game, so you don't have to worry about it, right? Labour have lost control of this Welsh council. Residents want us to focus on local services, community facilities and value for money, not party politics. So it's just quite interesting to talk about, because obviously Wales gets a lot of stick for being, again, Labour till they die and being, red all the way through, right? Which, given that many places in this country were mining towns and it's a lot of agricultural, rural kind of land, is often fairly understandable. But again, because of that die-hard tribalism, it's been used to take advantage of the people in these lands. A Labour town council, elected with a large majority at the last local government, now has an independent-led group in charge. 15 Labour councillors were voted on to Llanelli Town Council in May 2022, compared to 6 independents and 1 for Plaid Cymru. It is now changed. There have been various comings and goings, and the current makeup is 10 independents, 9 Labour, 2 Green, and 1 Plaid Cymru. So I did ask Groch to do a little bit of background on these 2 independent councillors here, Sean Rees and Michael Cranham. They have been appointed leader and deputy leader, respectively, of the independent-led group. Councillor Rees said the change followed a period in which he said councillors had expressed a loss of confidence in the direction and decision-making of the Labour administration. New administration, he said, was opening on a confidence and supply agreement basis rather than a coalition, and comprised 10, the independent councillors and the Plaid Cymru 1 councillor Terry Davis. So, just to give you a bit of background on these people, just from a quick analysis I essentially asked Groch to do, because I'd never heard of these people before. If you ask Groch to tell you about the political leanings of Llanelli councillors Sean Rees and Michael Cranham, so they're both serving as independent councillors for the Glynham Award in Llanelli in Sean Rees's case, and then Biggin Ward in Llanelli in Michael Cranham's case. And they're both under the Carmarthenshire County Council. He was elected in 2022 as an independent. Previously, in a 2017 election, he ran as a candidate for Plaid Cymru in the same ward, but narrowly lost by 1 vote. Then Michael Cranham, he was elected in 2022 as an independent. There is no clear record of prior party affiliation in available sources, but he is consistently presented as an independent in recent elections and roles. So just a little bit of a breakdown. If you ask then Groch to, say, describe their political leanings as more indicative of somebody who is stereotypically right-wing centrist or left-wing, certainly seems that we have people taking more of a pragmatic approach regardless of political affiliation or political leaning. So based on the available information, Sean Rees's leanings appear more indicative of someone who is stereotypically centre-left or left-wing, though his current independent status emphasises pragmatism over ideology. Again, prior affiliation with Plaid Cymru seemingly becoming, we can assume then maybe he became, dissatisfied, disillusioned, the word I was looking for, with all of their Nation of Sanctuary and diversity stuff, and then putting a woman with a burqa on, or the niqab, whatever it is, on the front of a Welsh nationalist poster, quote-unquote Welsh nationalist poster, and saying that Wales, this is us. So again, it does seem to be here that maybe not left enough to be part of the current Plaid Cymru administration, but seemingly, again, still able to work with them, indicating more of a focus on progressive policies, which is not necessarily, good, I don't think, at the moment. But again, given that they've decided to go independent and not be affiliated with any label, so to speak, and that even seems at this point that they're not even affiliated with Plaid Cymru, and that seemingly they wouldn't even affiliate themselves with Labour, that also says quite a lot. So I suppose we'll see how this turns out, give them the benefit of the doubt. For now, hopefully they are able to affect positive change in their communities, which is obviously what you would want. That's what they're there for. Michael Cranham's leanings, harder to pinpoint due to limited public statements, but they seem most indicative of a stereotypical centrist. It's a long-standing independent with no recorded prior party ties. His focus is on practical local governance, such as volunteer cleanups and community facilities. So in this instance, seeming to put a lot more focus on what, as I've spoken with many of the actual nationalists about in this country, community politics, which seemingly would be a positive. So I think on the whole, we might be seeing again, on the whole, some positive changes occurring here, especially with how entrenched the leftist dogma is in the minds of people, and they don't even realize it. Going back to that Animal Farm thing again, where people don't even realize what they're falling into, right? The animals are not quite able to put two and two together until it's too late. Right? Many of them literally believed Napoleon and the animals when they sent Boxer off to the knackers. They thought he was going off to the laughter house because they literally could not read the word slaughterhouse on the side of the van. That's a little bit of bait and switch that the trailer done, right? The trailer made you think that all of the animals were going off to the slaughterhouse in the very start, and that it was commissioned by Mr. Jones and all of this stuff. That was never the case. You never see the slaughterhouse van until very late on in the book, Boxer's betrayal. So that's again why you're going to be seeing this film coming up very, very soon. If you're going to go and watch it, I would not recommend watching it anyway, because obviously coming out of Hollywood, and anything that's going to be Orwell related coming out of Hollywood is going to be a massive distortion of what he was actually trying to communicate. But if you're going to watch it, understand that you're going and watching this complete fabrication of what the story was actually about. You're going to be watching this rose-tinted kind of Animal Farm where the evil is going to be the corporations, you know, not how the pigs, however noble their intentions they might have been at the start, turn into even bigger tyrants over the animals than the humans that came before, right? And as an allegory for communism, even coming from a pro-socialist perspective, which is Orwell's perspective. So again, I'm hoping that we're going to see some actual positive change here. And I don't know these guys. I'm, going to give them the benefit of the doubt until I see something come up, and who knows, maybe nothing will come up. Maybe there'll be nothing of note to report because they're literally just getting on with their jobs and affecting positive in their community, and there's nothing to report, right? That's negative anyway. And if any positive news comes out, we can cover that if it happens to come across my social media feed, essentially, because that's where this is from. So I'm hoping at the very least it's going to be indicative of a positive trend of breaking this dogma inside the Welsh man and woman's mind, essentially, of that tribalism and, loyalty to party above all else, even when they're literally taking everything from you behind your back. On the other hand, however, something that's not so good is that a path of poo has suddenly appeared in a Welsh beauty spot, which is, again, seemingly here that the focus on community politics in some areas is sorely going to be needed by the sounds of it. This is from, again, Wales Online in Porth Call. Path of poo suddenly appears in Welsh beauty spot, leaving families retching. One local resident said that it was disgusting to stumble across the scene while out on a dog walk. This is it, apparently, ladies and gentlemen, a sewage spill. So don't worry, doesn't seem to be fruits of diversity or anything like that. Don't you worry, don't you worry. But it does potentially indicate some kind of incompetence or whatever, and I hope this at the very least got resolved quickly, but I don't know. Either way, when you take into account that we now have literal trash rivers in many areas of the Welsh countryside as well, not exactly giving the benefit of the doubt to these sorts of things, maybe they're not putting people in the positions best suited for these kinds of positions to make sure these things don't happen. A Welsh beauty spot popular with dog walkers and families has been hit by a sewage spill, much to the dismay of local residents. The sewage was seen pouring out of a drain onto a path overlooking the beautiful rest bay in Porth Call over the weekend. Photos taken by a resident on Sunday afternoon show an area of the path next to playing fields covered in sewage, forcing those who wanted to pass to have to use the grass to avoid it. They said the sewage was also seeping onto the playing fields, which are popular with families and children. Obviously, that is now going to provide a massive health risk to those people if they want to use the fields and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff. I don't know how they're going to get around that. It's not like when we used to play rugby on a field and people would go and take their dogs up onto the field and let them shit on the field. And then you would have to try and go pick it up or try and avoid it. And on the worst case of training nights, when it was dark and cold and you didn't see anything because the lights are not working, you end up with a face full of it at the bottom of the ruck. So that's obviously stuff you want to avoid, especially with children. Obviously, you could have blindness. You could have all manner of health concerns coming out of this. So I hope that they're able to get on top of this quickly. Certainly hope that Porth Call has decided to actually put people in these positions that can actually deal with this and not put in a bunch of diversity hires. But we shall see. Certainly a very shame for the community that they have to now worry about this. And not only worry about that, it's a quite literal stain. It's quite a literal stain on what at one point, at the very least, was a massive tourist hotspot, but has now been systematically killed. And with the video I watched from Joe Marsh talking about the destruction of the Coney Island amusement park, which I have many memories there, which I'm lucky to create in my lifetime because I won't be able to create now. Memories that I had with my dad, or have because he's still here. He's not dead, have with my dad at the amusement park when I was a kid on the roller coaster, the Mega Blitz, I think it was called. You know, him sort of trying to get me on there to go and ride it with him because I was too scared to ride it at one point. And it was a nice little father-son moment that we had where he was able to coax me on, and we ended up really enjoying it, making one of those memories which you'll never forget. I won't be able to do that with my kids. And from what I understand, it's because they're going to destroy the park and put a bunch of flats on there, and we can only imagine what they are going to be used for. That is the case. If the Porthcawl people don't go apoplectic with rage because of how much their community and is going to suffer because of the lack of tourists and the lack of people using the high tide and so on, there should be, I'm not going to say there should be anything because I don't want to, you know, get taken down or go to prison or anything like that. Welsh Water said its crews attended to clear a blockage on the sewer, and the company has apologised for any inconvenience caused to residents. One resident who asked not to be named said they had recently moved to Porthcawl to enjoy the beautiful surroundings, so they were very disappointed to see something that is affecting the environment. This is another photo of it as well. So again, not good at all. Seeping onto the grass and the playing fields, it wasn't pleasant. The choice was either walking through the sewage or going across the grass. Obviously, this time of year, the grass was very wet and muddy, so most people stick to the path. I had to stop a lady with 2 children from walking through it. So I hope that they can get this sorted as soon as possible, because I don't want my beautiful country being known as a country where there's literal shit rivers flowing through, you know, a once prominent tourist destination, and where, you know, parents and families and children are going to be walking and potentially putting themselves in serious danger. So I certainly hope that they're able to resolve this as soon as possible. If you're in the area, please obviously stay clear if this is still not resolved by the time that you see this. Last 2 things now, ladies and gentlemen. I'm aware that this episode has gone on a fair bit longer than I intended it to. This from Andrew Bridgen. Former PM Gordon Brown has apparently stated that he was aware that Jeffrey Epstein was tracking girls in and out of the UK from Stansted Airport. Obviously, you would have, I imagine, read a lot of the Epstein files from now. You would have seen the whole thing about the emails where they're talking about the ages of the children, videos where, again, they're heavily redacted for obvious reasons. But there's enough in the way that the redactions are positioned that you can know exactly what's going on in some of these videos. It's absolutely disgusting. Nobody's been brought to justice yet, and it seems as though they're trying again to obfuscate from every way possible. They've given a bunch of these files to basically seemingly satisfy the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists who will write about everything. But where's the prosecutions? Where's the prosecutions, guys? It's not going to let go. It's not going to be let go of. Like, no matter how much you call it a Democrat hoax or whatever, no matter how much you go on about the Dow, right? No matter how much you go on about the S&P 500, right? We don't care. We want these disgusting predators put away for life. But here's how Gordon Brown apparently knew that Jeffrey Epstein was tracking girls into and out of the UK from Stansted airports. And again, makes you wonder how complicit he is in this whole thing as well, as it makes you wonder. Does he really? Does he really, or is he just saying it? You've seen how many Labour of all stripes, of all political rank, should we say, have been going down or accused, charged, convicted of various heinous offences. You know, there's a reason why many people in the UK literally call them now the pedo party, right? The party of the pedos or the pedo protectors, all of this kind of stuff, right? Does he actually? I don't think so. You've seen some of the things that he said about the rape gang victims as well, right? You had some people saying that essentially touting the lines again that these girls were asking for it. They were, you know, engaging in the act of selling themselves and all of this kind of stuff. They don't care. They don't care. I'm thinking maybe, again, is it just like the government says we need a national inquiry on grooming gangs or whatever, and then they never do, right? It's just political bluster to just try and get people off their backs and all of this stuff. And then they'll you know, say that, oh, well, it was voted down. We never got it through, all of this kind of stuff. Oh, boo-hoo. Victims will just continue crying themselves to sleep at night, and we'll let the perpetrators out to terrorize the communities. We'll have to do like 40% of their sentence if we even choose to arrest them. So I don't know. I don't think that he, you know, I think that maybe he would be letting on not as much as he actually knows. You know what I mean? But again, not making any accusations or anything like that. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. Obviously, that's why we want to see these people in a courtroom. right? We want to see these people in a courtroom so people who would be accused of stuff and whatever can get a fair trial, right? A lot of us thinking that we know the way that it's going to go already, but everybody is innocent until proven guilty. But 90 flights in and out of the UK, right, from various airports, Stansted being one of them, makes you think, is this related to the others as well? Is this related? Maybe. I don't know, because there's evidence coming out of the rape gang inquiry now where the rapists and whatever else, there's good evidence highlighting that many girls have actually been trafficked around the world to areas like Pakistan. And there's a good chance that many of the victims of these gangs, right, are not actually in the UK. They've been trafficked out of the UK, places like Pakistan, as being held out there as Sabia, essentially, right? So again, this is an area that hasn't even been explored yet. Many people like myself hadn't even considered this. Could there potentially be some link? Again, this is just me hypothesizing here. I have no evidence to say that this is true or whatever. Could there be a link between those trafficking networks and the Epstein trafficking networks? Okay, so that would blow the whole thing wide open. Right, that would blow the whole thing wide open if it was true. You know, so I don't know, maybe because again, this prolificking traffic network, you know, links to very, very powerful individuals that maybe if the gang supplied him with girls and whatever else, maybe then they would, you know, pull on these very powerful strings that they have in government to, again, keep these quiet, right? With the blackmail that Jeffrey Epstein has on our world leaders and very powerful people. Can you see how this is all fitting together? Again, it's all circumstantial. It's all speculative. Speculative is the word I was looking for. It's all speculative, but it's possible. It's possible. We saw that, as one example, the one guy who said that he loved the torture video was, I'll quickly find his name. Because it was a person in the Middle East. It was a thing where a lot of the Muslims or whatever saying, oh, in a world with Islam, if Islam was the dominating religion, there would be no Jeffrey Epstein and grooming gangs and all of this stuff. And it was thrown right back in their face because he was a really powerful guy in the Middle East. Let me just see if I can quickly find it. Just trying to... Oh, right. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to pause it a sec. Okay, just found it. Guy's name was Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem Named. And he was... sorry, no. Oh, it's me being stupid. I'm going to leave this in. That's a tremendous blunder from me. It was named as Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, and I thought that named was Named. So this is where I'll actually bring this up on screen because it's kind of hilarious, really. It's a dunk on myself. I'm going to cancel myself before we move into the last segment of today, which is effectively a cancellation. But it says here, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem at the top. In fact, I tell you what, I'll bring it up in a slightly different way. Bear with me 2 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, so you can see it. You can see it here. Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem named by Massey over Epstein torture video. So again, might we speculate that given the nature of a lot of these gangs and such, that there might be some, for lack of a better term, crossover and mutual interest in, you know, protecting these scandals as to maintain using blackmail that Jeffrey Epstein and the rest of them had over political leaders to not only enforce these, you know, political agendas, right, that we've seen in the modern day, but also cover up heinous crimes like the rape of Britain. Who's to say? Suppose we'll find out, hopefully. Now, last thing, the Gorton and Denton by-election candidate for the Greens, Hannah Spencer, who I believe was recently outed for saying that she essentially wanted to move away from the area because of how much it had been dominated by foreign takeaways and foreigners, right? So again, Greens all open borders, refugees welcome, say it loud, say it clear, we are queer, refugees welcome here, all of this stuff, right? So she said, and essentially moved away from the area because she didn't want to be associated with this classic Greens mentality. They have to go everywhere but in my house or in my community. She then said, this was in the topic of the Manchester Arena bombing, which I had to comment on this because I think it's too much of a layup. It's too much of a layup, not to mock the event, not to mock, the victims of the tragedy, anything like that, but to mock a stupidly silly statement where, again, it seems though she was not able to see how this is possibly the worst choice of words to bring across the point that she wanted to bring across, which is already a nonsensical point, which is the fact that the bombing of Manchester Arena was caused by the British people. Essentially, it's a fault of the British people, right? But the words she used just layer up perfectly for all manner of memes to be made, one of which I did. Well, I say meme, it's more of a joke. So she said that the fault of the Manchester Arena bombing lies at the feet of essentially British patriots and people that want their country back, and accuses Matt Goodwin of being representative of that. And I'll just play the video, ladies and gentlemen. These are the, I think she will be able to see why, in the end, very, you might say, regrettable words. Very regrettable words because of how much, as I mentioned before, they can be well and truly memed. But I'll just bring this video up on screen and show you now. This is what she had to say.
And what we did after the terror attacks was we came together and we stuck up for each other.
But you've never asked, why are those things happening?
Of course we have.
Why are they happening?
Of course we have, because people like you are dividing
so I'm responsible for the Manchester News Arena bombing now.
That's not
because
what I've
we
just
have
said.
very real issues with integration, and I've even had lots of minority Brits in this seat say exactly the same thing to me.
Jackie Pearson for the Liberal Democrats.
Making me defend Matt Goodwin after last episode. For God's sake. I hate the country for bringing me to these points, right? Reform, and Matt Goodwin in particular, brought me to the point of agreeing with Aaron Bastani, who's Navarra Media, the luxury communist guys, right? In getting a dunk on Matt Goodwin. I hate the country that brought me to this point, right? I hate the country now that also brought me to this point where I have to essentially come to his defense, right? Not only because obviously the assertion that the British people are responsible for an Islamic terror attack on their soil is absolutely disgusting. It's a disgusting blood libel in the same way that it was a blood libel against the Welsh people when they said that Axel Rudder-Cabana was a Welsh Christian choir boy, right? Just because he was born in Wales. So there's always these disgusting blood libels that go against people who say, look, let's stop these things from happening by not letting these people be here when they're not of our people anyway. They're guests at best, and our patience collectively, for the most part, right, even going back again, like we saw earlier on in this episode to the 60s, has long run out. Let's just literally deport the problem. No, the problem is, and you'll see here why I find her choice of words so hilarious in this morbid story that we're telling, people like you are dividing people. I would have thought it was the bombs that were dividing people. Quite literally. Quite literally, in some cases, dividing their arms and legs from their bodies. Michael Adebolajo and co. divided Lee Rigby's head from his body. Hannah. There's been nothing more dividing than the importing of these problems to British soil. It's not the fault of the British people to notice what's been going on. It's not the fault of anyone, bar the perpetrators, what ideologies they follow, and the political establishment that enabled them, which in this instance you are voicing a defense of, purely because you want to court this foreign bloc of voters, like you did when you had your photograph put up of you in the headscarf in the mosque. I'd just be careful, not as a threat to your safety or anything like that from regular British people who don't actually want that. A lot of people are thinking because of the things that these communities would do to you right now, most likely, if you weren't so useful to them. A lot of us are actually trying to put these initiatives across to protect you from the initiatives that you espouse, because like the animals in Animal Farm, you seem to not be able to see them. But saying that it's the British people's fault for these disgusting attacks and whatever else, because they divide people, when quite literally the C4 and Semtex and whatever else they use to enact these attacks, machetes and meat cleavers, right? The bottles that the rape gang perpetrators used on young girls that broke up and divided in their bodies. I think they are far more dividing than anything the British people have done, whom now just want these people done and gone so that they can have their country back. You actually profit off of this division, or you think you do, because you're trying to court this block. So, just proving again that these people, ladies and gentlemen, like Hannah, they're everything that they accuse you of. They accuse you of stoking division, so to speak. It's that very same division that they seek to profit off, and they conveniently ignore the actual division that takes place in a place like Manchester Arena, when Salman Abedi goes and fulfills what he feels is his purpose greater than that which his life is worth. And we just cannot live beside those people. And that'll do it for today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you not so much enjoyed, but found this episode useful. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, good night, wherever you are. Make sure you go over to the members areas to get access to Conversation with Callum Barker, as well as ready yourself for the members content that's coming up. Diolch yn fawr, thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr to see you next time. Have a fantastic morning, good afternoon, evening, good night, wherever you are. You take very good care of yourselves now. Godspeed.